Don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, "You are too arrogant. And if you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power."
Hotep, which in the language of ancient Egypt means we come with justice in peace. Welcome to Freedom Now, a Saturday Pan-Africanist and Internationalist World Affairs program. Freedom Now is committed to the principle of the rights of all peoples and nations to self-determination. We thank you deeply for your contribution to KPFK, which permits programs like Freedom Now to stay on the air. In this era of corporate acquisition and co-optation of all dissident media, we provide the microphone, challenging their corporate and racist point of view. So stay tuned for Agenda here at Freedom Now.
Habar Gani. This is Sister Thage with Freedom Now's agenda for this fun drive in Black August Saturday, August 1st, 2026. Black August calls us to remember the sacrifices made in the struggle for Black liberation, but it also asks us to consider who carries that history forward. To find out what's happening in Los Angeles for Black August, you can find Black August LA on social media platforms for the calendar, as this morning was the sunrise ceremony. Today we center Black women whose political organizing, historical memory, and cultural work have shaped freedom movements across the African diaspora. We commence with our sister Luyanda Kuboka and the African Drumbeat Historical Calendar for this past and last week of July. Then, this hour, prolific author, radical historian, professor of African American Studies at the University of Houston, and Freedom Now co-producer, Dr. Gerald Horne interviews Dr. Ashley D. Farmer, Associate Professor of African and African Diaspora Studies and History at the University of Texas at Austin, here to discuss her book, Queen Mother, Black Nationalism, Reparations, and the Untold Story of Audley Moore. And later in the hour, Dr. Horne interviews Dr. Andrea J. Queeley, Associate Professor of Anthropology and African Diaspora Studies at Florida International University, here to discuss her new book, Gloria Rolando, Memory, Liberation, and the African Diaspora Through Cuban Film. Our music clip mix includes MLK, Zap Mama, Alice Coltrane, Orishas, Buena Vista Social Club, McCoy Tyner, Khalil El-Zabar's Ritual Trio, Dead Prez, and more. So, as our Black August program dives deeper into freedom beyond borders, with memory as resistance from Black nationalism to the African diaspora, highlighting Black women as architects of freedom, we are in Fund Drive, and so our membership in KPFK is what keeps us on the air. And so when you join, you help us pay the bills so everyone can listen, and you're part of the LA community of people who care about the unique non-commercial voice that lets us know here what's really going on in the music world, the political world, and the plain just keep it together world. We even offer a KPFK t-shirt as a thank you gift to remind you and your friends of your commitment to free speech. So pick up the phone and become part of this remarkable experiment in free speech, or maybe add a little to your current subscription. Every penny counts. And so you can call this hour to pledge at 818-985-KPFK. That's 818-985-5735, or pledge online at www.kpfk.org. www.kpfk.org. So stay tuned for our Freedom Now calendar coming up next. La lucha sigue hasta la victoria siempre.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Sister Luyanda Kaboka with this July 25th weekly African drumbeat historical calendar of events and freedom fighters whom we refuse to ignore. So here at Freedom Now, we give these events and role models life by acknowledging their deeds. July 25th, 1973. Amy Jacques Garvey crosses over. She helped build the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Community League, and when her husband was in prison, she took over its leadership. July 25th, 1972. The U.S. health officials admitted using Africans as guinea pigs in the Tuskegee syphilis experiments for over 40 years, providing them with aspirins under the guise of treatment. July 26, 1927, Heidi Santa Maria was born. She was one of the 6 Cuban women in Castro's July 26, 1953 movement that launched the Cuban Revolution. While imprisoned, she witnessed her brother and fiancé tortured to death by the Batista regime. Their eyes and testicles were brought to her in an effort to break her. Upon her release, she joined the guerrillas in the Sierra Maestra Mountains. After the revolution, she held major positions in the New Cuba. July 26, 1969. The first Pan-African Cultural Festival was held in Algeria, bringing together the varied aspects of the African world. July 26, 1956. President Nasser of Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal to break the neo-colonial control of African national resources. July 27, 1915. The United States invades and colonizes Haiti, setting in motion a long anti-colonial and neo-colonial struggle that continues to this day. July 27, 1937. Open revolt by African workers in Barbados against British colonial rule, one of the hundreds throughout the Caribbean. July 27, 1974. The General Union of Eritrea Women was founded at the Vanguard Association in the Eritrean War of Independence. July 28, 1917. Over 10,000 Africans born in the United States marched down New York City's Fifth Avenue in silent protest of the lynching and racial inequalities. July 29, 1824. Alexandre Dumas, the African author of the classic book The Three Musketeers, is born. July 29, 2001. Fulon Devi, the legendary bandit queen who rose from the lower caste child bride to become the leader of a band of outlawed lower caste rebels who were in opposition of the Indian parliament. She was a champion of the rights of lower caste. Devi was married at the age of 11 to an abusive older man. She ran away, but was abducted and gang raped by upper caste men. She joined the band of lower caste outlaws and returned to murder 22 of her attackers, creating a sensation across India. She eluded capture for a period, but surrendered and was imprisoned for 11 years. In 1996, Devi was elected to parliament as part of the Socialist Party. She was gunned down at the age of 37 on her own doorstep. July 29, 1970. Delano, California grape strike ends with a major victory for the Huelga forces of United Farm Workers and Cesar Chavez. So-called immigrant farm workers went on strike from 1966, fighting not only the major wine manufacturers, but their mafia henchmen. July 30th, 1945. Adam Clayton Powell Jr., the most militant African congressman, was born. Adam Clayton Powell embraced Malcolm X and scores of revolutionaries in a broad alliance to bring about social change in the United States in the 60s. July 30th. Hica da Silva, the Joan of Arc of Brazil, a legendary African slave who rose to immense heights of power as an organizer and leader of slave rebellions to become the unofficial Empress of Brazil. July 1st, 1969, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi led the overthrow of the puppet regime of King Idris, establishing the Libyan Revolutionary Jamahiriya and providing political, military, and economic support for revolutionary movements worldwide, including the United States. This has been Sister Luyanda Koboka with our revolutionary events calendar here at Freedom Now at 90.7 FM in Southern California and 98.7 FM in Central California, and streaming live on the web at www.kpfk.org. We would like to close this session of the program with a collective chant, so please join us wherever you are. In the words of those freedom fighters on the motherland and in the diaspora, Amandla, which means power, and the response Awetu, which means is ours. Amandla,
Awetu.
Amandla,
Awetu.
Amandla,
Awetu.
Yes, you are listening to Freedom Now on KPFK 90.7 FM Los Angeles. Freedom Now, a Pan-African Internationalist World Affairs program that covers global struggles, features a jazz spotlight, and broadcasts an African drumbeat historical calendar. It's co-produced by Dr. Gerald Horne, and we got to give a big shout out to Brandon and Tej for keeping this show together. 818-985-5735, 818-985-KPFK. The real treasure here is KPFK, that we stay on the air and keep shows like Freedom Now on the airwaves. We're asking you to go and pick up your phone and hit 818-985-5735. Pledge your support that shows like this continue to be on the KPFK airwaves. Pledge for the people that cannot pledge. How about those folks on a budget? How about those folks on lockdown? You can pledge for them. And right now we're going to hopefully be able to get a call in, a $200 pledge, a $300 pledge, or maybe we can match some other Freedom Now listener. And if we can get that $300, we can see if we could match that. And that would be $600 for Freedom Now. 818-985-5735. Call the phone room and ask them what we have. Tote bag, t-shirts at a $50 donation. But what's more important, you keep KPFK on the air by keeping the lights on and the transmitter. We are listener sponsored, so we depend upon listeners like you to come through and help us out. We have to continue the work to understand the history of America and where we stand and who we are as people. 818-985-5735. Let's keep those phones ringing. We really need a call right now. We don't have anyone on the phone, and we're asking you to be that person that steps up and goes to the phone and pledge your support for this program. We've been around since 1959, and that's because the people in the 60s and the 70s appreciated what was going on. We were covering the war in Vietnam. We were on the air with Nixon, Bush, Clinton, Obama, and yeah, you know who I'm talking about, the orange one. 818-985-5735, and we talked about it. And that's what the conversations are about. So if you believe in free speech, call now and pledge your support at any level. We need that $500 angel, that $1,000 angel that supports public radio, independent news and views. 818-985-5735, 818-985-KPFK. Call now and pledge your support for Freedom Now.
For KPFK Radio, this is Gerald Horne, and with me on the line is Ashley D. Farmer, Associate Professor of History and African Diaspora Studies at the University of Texas at Austin, and author of the book Queen Mother, Black Nationalism, Reparations, and the Untold Story of Audley Moore. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK Los Angeles, Ashley D. Farmer.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So who was Queen Mother Moore, and why did you write a book about her?
Yeah, so I stumbled on Queen Mother Moore while writing my first book, Remaking Black Power, How Black Women Transform an Era. And I interviewed maybe 40 or 50 different activists, men, women, and everybody had a story about Queen Mother Moore. Queen Mother Moore introduced them to Marcus Garvey. Queen Mother Moore taught them about reparations. Queen Mother Moore taught them about Pan-Africanism. And I was stunned that I had not seen or heard more about her as a historian of Black women and radical politics. And I soon learned why. Although Queen Mother Moore lived almost 100 years, she lived from 1898 to 1997. And she was born in the Jim Crow South of Louisiana to a relatively kind of idyllic Black girlhood for that time, but eventually ended up losing both of her parents and sliding down the class ladder. She met Marcus Garvey in the 1920s and became a nationalist then and there. She was a member of the Communist Party. She was an organizer for nationalist work on the ground floor in the 40s and 50s and early 60s when everybody's eyes were more so trained towards things like the March on Washington and the sit-ins. She mentored major people like Malcolm X and Dr. Muhammad Ahmed. And her last public appearance of note is at the Million Man March with Farrakhan in the mid-1990s. So I thought to myself, how is this person who basically shows us the history of 20th century Black nationalism virtually lost from history? And I soon learned it was because we didn't really have an archive of her. She had a third grade education. She was kind of thinking in motion, writing and giving speeches as she went. And so there wasn't really much to kind of go by. So over the past 10 years, I've slowly and dutifully collected memorabilia, talked to people, found her everywhere and anywhere in the Radical Archive. And the result is the biography, which is a cradle to grave story of her life.
So back up for a second and talk to us about her relationship to Marcus Garvey.
Yes, so she was living and working in New Orleans, Louisiana. As I mentioned, she was fairly well off when she was first born, but the death of both of her parents sent her down the class ladder. So it was almost instantaneous. One day she had nannies and maids. The next day she's working as a nanny or a maid. And she married a Jamaican man who introduced her to Garvey. Garvey came to New Orleans and she was kind of roused to action by seeing him, not only because he was a masterful orator, but also because the police had barred him from speaking the night before. So as she tells it, the next night when they gotten permission for Garvey to speak, all of New Orleans Black folks were packing, and we're talking, hundreds, if not thousands strong. And when Garvey came into what was then called the Longshoremen's Hall, the police threatened to arrest him, and she and others defended his right to speak with guns. So if you're a kid in your early 19s, let me start again. If you're a kid that is 19 or 20 years old and you're trying to make sense of the world and you see Black people defending Garvey's right to speak with guns, and then you sit down and you hear this story about how the Africa that you've learned is actually one full of riches, that your hair is beautiful, that your skin is beautiful, it transforms you then and there. After that moment, she got plugged into his UNIA, and she remained a Garveyite for the rest of her life.
Now, you also mentioned that she had a relationship with the Communist Party. As I recall, that took place in Harlem, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Correct.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so she, like many other Black folks in the South, migrated west and then north, looking for a better life. And she wound up in Harlem after, a stint in California and a stint in Chicago. And there she wasn't quite sure what to do. It was the late 1920s, early 1930s, so the start of the Depression, and Garvey had been deported. So his UNIA was still there, but obviously not working at the same robust level it had been, say, 10 years before. And as she tells it, she was living and working in Harlem and happened upon a protest for the Scottsboro Boys, the youths that were on trial for allegedly, right, raping two white women on a train. And she had never seen people be galvanized in that way. But also she saw Black folks like James Ford in the Communist Party, for example, connect the plight of people in Harlem with that of folks of Scottsboro, with that of folks in, say, Ethiopia. And so the Communist Party felt like something that was similar to Garveyism in its kind of understanding of global Black struggle, but also because they said that Black people were a separate nation, right, through their Black Belt thesis and had the right to secession. So she says that it was a good vehicle through which for her to express her nationalist politics. And she worked day and night for the Communist Party for decades and rose in its ranks.
Now, she also was a reparations activist. When did that begin? And talk to us about it.
Yeah, so Moore was around, again, most of the 20th century. So she would have been at least somewhat familiar or have heard of Callie House, who had started a reparations organization, had a big chapter in New Orleans. She had also experienced 2 world wars, so she had seen how governments had paid other governments. So I don't want to give the impression that this was her idea. It was something about repayment was in the ether. But she returned home in the height of McCarthyism, when everybody was kind of getting out of town, when the Communist Party was under attack in the early 1950s. And she reconnected with her old Garveyite folks in New Orleans. And there they started to kind of organize for reparations. What did that look like? That looked like her formally kind of coming up with the idea that someone needed to pay Black people, not just for slavery, right, and their unrequited labor there, but also for the nearly century, because we're talking about she's in the late 1950s, early 1960s, of Jim Crow and the psychological, social, housing, economic, political degradation that Black people had been through. So with this group that included her sisters and other Black women in Louisiana, they started what we call the modern reparations movement. She wrote pamphlets and she started giving speeches compelling people to demand the government pay Black people for their experiences during Jim Crow. And she went from basically city to city, state to state, championing this in the early 1960s, while everybody's eye was really focused on, say, the civil rights movement.
She also had a relationship with the Republic of New Africa. What was it, and when did that relationship begin?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in this group, this group of middle-aged Black women in Louisiana, they were also passing around this pamphlet about a Black republic. That idea of Garvey and a separate Black nation, that idea from the Communist Party of a Black nation in the Black Belt, had been percolating and staying with her even after she left both of those organizations. And she continued to champion it in the late 1950s and early 1960s. So by the time the mid to late 1960s comes around, people are embracing that idea again. So they meet in Detroit in 1968 to talk about kind of where the movement is going at this point. And it's a group of about 500 activists, mostly radical, but some that I would say were moderate, coming to kind of talk about what the next step is. And this is in the aftermath of Malcolm X's assassination and, a stymied movement in many ways. So people talk about seceding and creating a separate Black nation called the Republic of New Africa. And as people who were there tell it, that I talked to for the book, when they unfurled this idea of a literal kind of declaration of independence of a Black nation, she was among the first to get up and sign her name on that, right? And then everybody kind of lined up behind her because they weren't going to be outdone by someone that was basically a grandma. But the Republic of New Africa did reassert this idea that Black people had the right to a separate nation or territorial nationalism in the areas of the southeastern United States. In some cases, they organized in northern cities like New York, where Moore was more popular in organizing for it. They also created, a plebiscite in Jackson, Mississippi, and began that work. So I would say that not only did she kind of keep the framework of a separate Black nation alive until the late 1960s, but she also pushed young activists who were organizing in the Republic of New Africa to move forward with that idea. And she was considered among the first of the officials in that group.
She also spent time in Africa. Where and when?
Yeah, so what's interesting is although Moore championed African liberation from about the 1930s with Italy's invasion of Ethiopia, she didn't actually set foot on African soil of any sort or fashion until the 1970s. She often said that she didn't want to go as a tourist, but she wanted to go as someone who was embracing the motherland. And so in the 70s, after the 1960s saw the rapid decolonization of many different African nations, she felt ready to go. And she did a lot of trips in a short amount of time in the 1970s. So she went to Guinea, she went to Ghana, she went to Nigeria, she went to Tanzania multiple times, usually to meet with other activists from America and across the diaspora to make future plans for liberating Black people around the world. And it was a revelation for her. She realized that while beautiful and interesting and diverse, she had kind of flattened her idea of Africa, and that she had kind of essentialized or kind of put people in a small box in terms of what she thought Africans wanted.
Finally, Ashley D. Farmer of University of Texas at Austin, author of the book Queen Mother, Black Nationalism, Reparations, and the Untold Story of Audley Moore. What's next on your research agenda?
So I am a historian, like I said, of Black women in radical politics. I've written books about Black power activists and now more. And one of the through kind of lines between my earlier work is the surveillance of Black women activists across organizations, across time. Queen Mother Moore, for example, was surveilled by the FBI from the 1920s to the 1970s. So now I'm moving towards thinking through writing about how Black women endured surveillance and political repression and what we can learn from them today.
I take it you're filing Freedom of Information Act requests?
Absolutely. I've been filing Freedom of Information Act requests for about 15 years now. And so I have received many and been thwarted by many, but there are real untold stories of how Black women in particular were surveilled. We think a lot about those like a Fred Hampton or a Malcolm X who are important and endured a certain kind of repression. But there were often women right beside them, sometimes, kind of literally right next to them, who were also enduring repression. And I want to shine a light on their experiences as well.
Well, we all look forward with eager anticipation to that work as well, Ashley D. Farmer. But I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. But thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK, Los Angeles.
Thank you for having me.
You are listening to Freedom Now on KPFK 90.7 FM. And here's a fundraising update. We did get a $200 donation in Los Angeles who has pledged $200, and thank you so much. We want to match that here on Freedom Now. So if there's anyone out there that can match, that would be incredible. And that would be $400 for KPFK. Pitching in that $200 and you pitching in that $200. Or how about two of you pledging that $100? Or four of you pledging $50? Or six of you pledging $25, $75? That would turn us around right here on KPFK, and we'd be able to reach our goal. Our goal on Freedom Now is $1,000, and we are about $600 short of our goal, $700 short of our goal. So, hey, if we can get a last-minute call, if we could get some calls, how about 7 of you rushing to the phone and pledging your support at 818-985-5735. That's 818-985-KPFK, and make the difference. We really need to reach our overall goal, which is $200,000. So we're hoping we could really come through today on this Saturday 818-985-5735, 818-985-KPFK. That's the number to call to pledge your support for this radio station that we remain on the air. Freedom Now on every Saturday at 11 a.m., touching on subjects of discrimination, racism, history. It's all here on this program. And you also get a community calendar that lets you know what's happening around the community. That's what public radio is all about, is connecting the community, connecting us together with you. And that's how we overcome. We shall overcome. And that's been the message for decades as those oppressors try to put us down. But we are resilient because we are connected. We are unified together. And they don't like that. They don't want KPFK sending out the message. And they don't want you listening because they don't want you to be knowledgeable about what's going on in the war in Iran, the streets of LA, and ICE, who we denounce. 818-985-5735. You said you were going to arrest all the criminals, not my taco lady, not the father that works hard trying to provide for his family. We didn't agree to that. I didn't sign up for that, and I'm not voting for that. 818-985-5735, but vote for KPFK. Vote that we stay on the air, and call now and let them know that you want this show on the air and you support KPFK. If you called now at 818-985-5735 and said, I love this station, and pledged your support, that would be incredible. How about a one-time caller? How about someone who's never called before? Do it now. This is a tax-deductible charitable donation. You can donate $200, $500, but we do need to make that match from Khalil, who put up $200, and we need to match that. And we're just about $75 short of making that match. 818-985-5735, 818-985-KPFK. I'm Gary Baca, along with Freedom Now, along with Tej, right here on KPFK. Remember, call now, 818-985-5735, 818-985-KPFK.
For KPFK Radio, this is Gerald Horne, and with me on the line is Andrea Queeley, Associate Professor of Anthropology and African Diaspora Studies at Florida International University, and author of the book Gloria Rolando, Memory, Liberation, and the African Diaspora Through Cuban Film. Welcome to Freedom Now, KPFK Los Angeles, Andrea Queeley.
Yes, thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
And it's a pleasure to have you. So, who is Gloria Rolando, and why did you produce a book about her?
So, Gloria Rolando is a force. First of all, she's a Black Cuban woman, now 72, I believe. She just celebrated her 72nd birthday, and she's the second woman, Black woman, to be a director in ICAIC, so Cuba's film industry entity that produces Cuban films, and to say that she's a force. Part of the reason why I say this is because she's incredibly determined to tell the stories of Africans and descendants of Africans, both in Cuba and through the diaspora, and also the connections, right? And to challenge the erasure, the predominant erasure that's embedded in, the ideology of raceless nationalism that's very prominent in Cuba and throughout Latin America. And so she has produced 16 films. She's, all of them are. One is a feature film that is on the 1912 massacre, and the rest are documentaries. And, her contribution, I think, has been, she's recognized more, I think, outside of Cuba than inside, or at least her work is recognized outside of Cuba more so than inside. But also there's a very strong cadre of artists and intellectuals and scholars and folks on the island who celebrate her work and recognize its power, right? And so I was drawn, actually was introduced to her and to her work back before grad school, when I went to Cuba with the Venceremos Brigade, and we screened her film Hijos de Baraguá, My Footsteps in Baraguá, that was about the English-speaking Caribbean migration to Cuba and the children and grandchildren of folks who had migrated to Cuba. And at that time, I was kind of trying to learn about the revolution and understand about race and Blackness within the Cuban context and within the revolutionary context. And so I had this kind of imagining of, as somebody whose grandparents on my father's side came to the US around the same time that many people were migrating. There are in all about 300,000 people who migrated from the English-speaking Caribbean in the first third of the 20th century. That I had this, idea of like, who would I become? Who would I have been? Had my grandparents went to Cuba instead of the United States. And from there, I just kind of shelved that. As kind of knowing that there were people of English-speaking Caribbean descent in Cuba, and then fast forward when I started my graduate studies in anthropology, I circled back to that and ended up, focusing on those communities and their ways in which they navigate and have navigated the Cuban landscape, political, economic, social, racial landscape, specifically in the kind of post-special period era.
So where are your grandparents from?
Montserrat. They came from Montserrat. It's a small island.
Of course.
Okay. Yeah.
So how does she approach the history of Black women?
That is another piece that is really powerful. So in her documentaries, you have the voices of Black women and Black women's narrative, right? So the centering of the voice, the very palpable way in which she communicates the fullness of Black women's experiences, right? And so if you look at her films, and first of all, women are always included in them, right? So whether or not that's those are the historians or other experts, intellectuals who are providing information, right, about pieces of the stories that she's telling, whether or not that's the characters or the subject specifically of the film. So A Dialogue with My Grandmother is all about Black women's contributions to Cuban society and culture. You have In Hijos de Baraguá in her films about the migration. You have Black women's experiences being centered. And I have a funny story. So the book, this book, which is an edited volume, by the way. So this is an edited volume. So we have contributors from Cuba on island. I have a piece in there, of an interview in there with her sound engineer. And we have, and there's like one contributor who's based in Panama, one person who's based in the UK. So we have, it's an edited volume from folks that are compelled to write about and think about Gloria's work. But when I thought about this project, when Reembarque came out, when Reshipment came out, and she was on a U.S. tour, and she was in Miami, and I was introducing her. Somebody had asked me, Jose Perez, who was hosting the event, asked me to introduce her, and I was in the middle of a lot of stuff at that moment in my life, but then she had just accomplished this major achievement, which I didn't say before, but she founded her own in the Cuban context, which is very state dominant. She founded her own production company. So she was making films through her own production company, which was more than a notion. Doing so with very little resources and support and all of that. And I thought about that and thought about how she just accomplished this feat, because each film is a feat. Of making this documentary about Haitian migration to Cuba, and this very, very powerful documentary, and all she could do when I went up to her and said hello and all of that, and she's like, okay, wait, do you have pictures, or do you know where I can find pictures of Black women's hands? Because I'm working on my next documentary, and it's about Black women, and this is Dialogue with My Grandmother, and I want to have these close-up, these images of Black women's hands, and these hands that have cared for, children and loved and worked and, and kept us safe. And she just was, talking about the importance of these images and the importance of Black women's hands and in the film that she was making. And so I thought, look, she does not rest. right? And I think that as a Black woman filmmaker, you know, she's in somebody who is really a matriarch, right? So in the book, in the introduction, we talk about her as maroon and matriarch, that's the role that she plays in her family. And that, you know, when I was talking with her sister and her cousins, and they were just talking about her in that way, right? And the care that she provides. And so I think that provides her with a particular insight, and also a real motivation, commitment, drive to share those stories, right? To center Black women. And particularly in one thing that she talks about in different interviews and is the representation of Black Cuban women is so problematic, right? It's hypersexualized, it's one-dimensional, it doesn't really, you know, take into account the fullness, right, of who it is that they are. And so for her, and she, you know, there's this one point at the end of, towards the end of dialogue with my grandmother, where she takes those horrible dolls, right, that are this basically, you know, we would look upon as, you know, blackface or minstrel dolls. You know, the hyper exaggerated breasts and buttocks, and would some often swing a cigar, you know, with a pitch black face and red lips, the whole thing. And so she's throwing them, and she asks, you know, how is it that with all of this richness and all that we have been, that this, you know, these dolls are what it is, that is how it is how Cuba is representing Black women, you know, to the world, and because these are, you know, are all over the tourist shops, et cetera, et cetera. So how is it that we have these images, and these are what predominate, right?
Now, speaking of centering Black women, she did a film on Assata Shakur, who is familiar to many in our audience, given her roots on the North American mainland and her passing away on the island some weeks ago.
Yeah.
How would you describe their relationship and the film that she did about her?
Oh my goodness. Well, I can't speak to their relationship so much, right? So I know that, you know, they were clearly had a sisterhood connection, right? And I think for Assata to trust Gloria enough to have that, to allow her to make that documentary, and Gloria's respect for and interest in Assata's story, not just as a revolutionary and an exile, but a, you know, a sister in this journey, right? And so I think that really comes through in that documentary, Eyes of the Rainbow, which is such a beautiful tribute and so profound. And I'm so, especially because Assata just passed, that recently, that, you know, I have revisited that documentary and find the telling of her story and her words and the fact that it's preserved. I just have, my gratitude for Gloria Rolando really knows no bounds, right? And I think this is a thread throughout, is that she's not just archiving, she's not just creating a kind of visual archive and a space for Black women and Black people in Cuba, right, to tell the Cuban stories, but it's really African diasporic stories. So, and even if you look at like in the 1912, the documentaries on 1912, the 3 chapters on 1912, she incorporates and is always in conversation with, you know, with other Black experiences, right? With Black experiences across borders. And so we really see that with the documentary on Assata, that she's in, you know, in the music that she chooses, in the images that she chooses, that she is, you know, opening up, or not, you know, shining a light, not even just opening up the conversation, but shining a light on that conversation, right? On that relationship, that connection that exists across national boundaries. And so the film Eyes on the Rainbow, I think, is a testament to that, to Gloria's commitment to the kind of individual story of Assata Shakur, shedding light on this kind of common experience and struggle. And she does a beautiful job, I think, of incorporating or illustrating that relationship, right?
Now, you've alluded to this in your previous response, but would you care to elaborate on how she approaches the African diaspora in Cuba?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that I would just reiterate that it's about connection, right? And so it's how it's situating African Cubans, Afro-Cubans, Cubans of African descent, Black Cubans, are many ways that, they might identify themselves or have been identified, right? Positioning them within Cuban history, right? And the narrative of Cuban history, and looking at points of historical significance through the eyes of Black Cubans, right? And then it's also, this really profound connection with other folks of African descent and world history, right? So it's how Black Cubans are situated within national history, diasporic history, and world history. And so that goes, throughout her documentaries, that you see, like the documentary that she's like feverishly working on now. So again, with every documentary, she's like, this is it. It's too much. It's too hard. And then, I think I'm gonna, I gotta tell the story of the Buffalo Soldiers in Cuba, right? So this is another another dimension, right? Or another project, and then in which she's really illuminating that dimension of Cuban history, but also U.S. history. And so it's again, I think the part of the brilliance of Gloria Rolando and her films is that she is really upending these imposed divisions, right? So the imposed divisions that we see in the ways that history is narrated, in particular, right? So these divisions, these national boundaries across time and space, some of the ways that she superimpose, I talk about this in my piece, her use of superimposition, so that she's, using old photographs or archival materials and superimposing contemporary, faces of contemporary Black Cubans, and in order to really present that, that argument, right? Or that reality of the relationship between past and present.
Now, you've also alluded to her film Reshipment, but
Yes.
would you like to add anything else on that project?
I mean, and again, another really beautiful and powerful film. And I think that the thing that I would add about that, I mean, there are a lot of things to say about it, but the thing that I would add is that she managed to get to Port-au-Prince, right? I think she said she had 1 day or 2 days of filming. And she got there, she was like, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going to start. She had her film crew, and she happened upon an elder who was in, a park or on a bench, she said, I think. And she started talking about what she was doing there. And she's like, oh, he, apparently, and he had actually been to Cuba and had been expelled during the deportation campaign. And so, which is, of course, serendipitous. We can talk about all kinds of spiritual, reasons how that came to be. But she, she has a level of expertise, and a level of, I think, trying to search for the word. It's like, her instinct to go where and when and how, and her ability and her willingness, in part because of circumstances, because the conditions are so difficult, that she just kind of does it, right? Like right now, the conditions are very difficult in Cuba, right? We all know what's going on, right? And she's in the process of producing this film, right? She's fine, she's making a way. And so I think just even the story of her telling these stories is a story in and of itself, right? It is in conversation with the stories that she's telling. and through her documentary. So anyway, but in terms of reshipment, in terms of Embarque, when I say people, it is not widely known that there were hundreds of thousands of Haitians who went to Cuba to work in sugar and coffee primarily, but of course they're people, and so we did all kinds of different things, and that they are communities that carry on the cultural, practices, the some of the linguistics. So there's some people who speak Creole who keep Vodun alive, who are there and are Haitian Cubans, right? And so the film, again, and I'm thinking of one interview in particular, an elder who used to play baseball with Fidel when Fidel would come home from school, because he worked on the in and around the plantation of the Castro family. And so and I remember seeing that and saying, wow, one of the things that she's doing is she's really, again, putting Black Cubans now, and Haitian Cubans, inside the story of the revolution, right? In a very profound way. And the other thing that she does that Reembarque really, executes beautifully is, her work is a project to undermine or to challenge white supremacy, right? And so when one of the cornerstones of white supremacy is dehumanization, so that you see in these films, how she allows the people that she's interviewing the space to grieve, because so much of our story is about loss, it's about separation and loss, and how do we, and having to kind of soldier on in the midst of that, right? And so you see that that she's really, in that film, and not just in Embarque, in other films as well, just seeing how she really gives provides a space for people to experience that, both is those people who she's interviewing as well as the audience who's watching the film, that we are sitting with them and we are bearing witness. She gives us an opportunity to bear witness to that, to this multidimensionality of ourselves and our humanity.
What about her contribution to Yoruba studies?
Oh, Yoruba studies. Wow. Okay, so without being a Yoruba scholar, I can to speak to how Yoruba, to how Ifa, how Lukumi shows up, right? One of her earlier films, like Ogun, the eternal presence of Ogun, eternal presence. So that is focused on Lázaro Ros, who was part of the beautiful singer performer for the National Conjunto Folclórico, who has since passed on, but was a kind of local, I don't know, I want to say the word celebrity, but very beloved, right? Very beloved. And so he was a subject of her first documentary, and you see, the orishas being danced. You see the music, the culture in that film very prominently, clearly, and the batakis, the stories of the orisha. So she reenacts this story of Ogun and Oshun in that documentary, woven again throughout, and then with Asada. I think Asada was a child of Oya, and so Eyes of the Rainbow, and Oya, rainbow is one of the symbols of Oya, and so you see the way that her grounding in Lukumi and in Yoruba tradition and practices, it is interwoven, and it informs her as an artist and as a visual historian, as a filmmaker. And so I think that again, I'm not a Yoruba scholar, but I think I would encourage Yoruba scholars to watch her films and to see how it is that she executes that, how she incorporates not just music and movement, but worldview, right, into her work.
Finally, Andrea Queeley, who has produced this book on the Cuban filmmaker Gloria Rolando, what is next on your research agenda?
Well, first, this came out in July. It was very much a labor of love, long haul. So I am excited to do a number of book launches and talks and hopefully use this book as a vehicle to share her work. And so I'm working on doing film screenings and book talks and all of that. So that's that I want to just put that out there. So if any of your listeners are interested in having a screening of one or of her films and a talk, then please do contact me. And I'm actually working on a project that has nothing to do with Cuba or film or Latin America. It's about Black home ownership in the U.S. and there's a Caribbean Latin American immigrant component to it, but this in the initial stages. So that's what I'm working on now, is getting that off the ground.
Well, Professor Queeley, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK, Los Angeles.
Wonderful. It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
And in closing, we'd like to thank everybody who has donated so far this hour. Thank you to our guests, Dr. Ashley D. Farmer. Thank you, Dr. Andrea J. Queeley. Thank you to our producers, Dr. Gerald Horne, Brother Brandon, Sister Flora, and all those who made today's program possible, our board op Sly. If you still have not had a chance to donate and you like today's programming and you would like to support KPFK and Freedom Now, just remember that when you give to KPFK, you're investing in your local community, and your gift keeps public radio free for everyone to benefit from this. And so even those who cannot afford to give right now, for those of you who can, please help pay it forward by becoming a new member, renewing your membership, or making an additional gift right now and become a member today, or renew your membership at kpfk.org/donate, or call 818-985-KPFK. That's 818-985-5735. Again, thank you to everybody for keeping Freedom Now on the air. Signing off, this is Sister Thage. And until next week, as always, we stand ready for revolution.
We state these facts only to let you know that those of us who are revolutionary, Pan-Africanists, is not because we love revolution. It is historically determined, and we have no alternative but to follow history and to use history for the benefit of our people.